Welcome to the Synthesis of Yoga, the book that changed my life. We have reached the 7th chapter of Part 1, Yoga of Divine Works, and this chapter is called Standards of Conduct and Spiritual Freedom. In the last episode, we saw that the hidden doer, recognizing the one who is actually doing the work, that is the keystone, the mindset that we need to establish within ourselves so that the right perspective is seen. What appears as our independent individual will, with that clear sense of separation and identification that I am the doer, is a limited perspective. We are just outlets or instrumental conditions of a vaster cosmic action of the universal being who is working its dream, its purpose through us. That perspective is central. And this vaster universal being not only supports from all around, subliminally, from within, it also attracts from above because it knows the vaster purpose, evolutionary purpose. And we are the channels through which it is working itself out. Recognizing this helps us to place the yoga of divine works in the right perspective. Who is the doer? The true doer of the works. Now, we come to today's episode. You will find the link in the description to this chapter for those who are new. We will be reading line by line. It is a way of practicing yoga itself because Aurobindo has written these messages, these texts, from a perspective of a yogic consciousness, and its patterns are there in his writings. So when we read his words and its rhythms, it gets imprinted into us. So we are going line by line. So we are starting with paragraph number 4. This is episode 90. Link is in the description. But what then must be the spiritual position of the personal worker? Personal worker. We experience ourselves to be an independent person who is doing an independent work. That is our primary poise. So what then must be the spiritual position of the personal worker? That's the question with which he is starting. What is his true relation in dynamic nature to this one cosmic being and this one total movement? So there is this dynamic nature. We see we are part of Earth. Earth has its ecosystem, its seasons, its dynamic forces working through us. We are part of it, integral part of it. So what is his true relation in dynamic nature? We are in the dynamic nature to this one cosmic being and this one total movement. So totally we have these three parties. One is the individual who is doing the work, and this individual is part of a dynamic nature which is moving through all simultaneously, and this is emerging from one cosmic being and one total movement. It's a total movement, not isolated movement. The whole is moving like a vast symphony. all the instrumentation moving in harmony and progressing its unfolding of its evolutionary theme, and we have emerged in the process. He is a center only, this instrument that we are. It is only a center. He is a center only, a center of differentiation. The vast cosmic whole is moving, in which we are differentiating, a center of differentiation from the vaster one movement. We are able to differentiate into a unique thread of expression of the one personal consciousness, a center of determination of the one total movement. So we have our personal consciousness, a center of determination. We are also experiencing action as if something that we are determining, of the one total movement. There is total movement of which we are not necessarily aware. We have our personal consciousness, where we are experiencing ourselves to have a determination, and we are in a way differentiating from the rest. So there is a separative consciousness that is working through. So he is a center only, a center of differentiation of the one personal consciousness, a center of determination of the one total movement. Imagine it to be like a symphony. There is a conductor who is conducting the symphony, and there are hundreds of instrumentals playing, of which one instrument, that's what we are individually. But when this instrument is not aware, neither of the conductor or the larger collection of other instruments that are also playing simultaneously, you are primarily aware of one's own differentiated tone, your own particular frequency and your own particular part of the symphony. And you are believing that you are the one who is deciding, determining. There's a sense of personal action in it, and of which some of the instruments that are surrounding you immediately that we are aware. The rest of the vast, infinite collection of the instrumentation, which is the vaster ecosystem of which we are part, we are not much aware. We know a little bit of response from the rest of the instrumentation that is playing around us. So he is a center only, a center of differentiation of the one personal consciousness, a center of determination of the one total movement. His personality reflects in a wave of persistent individuality. There is a persistent individuality. We experience ourselves to be someone who is persistent. Over years, we experience ourselves as independent, persistent. I am the same person who was there 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago. There is a persistence of individuality. My body, though it is growing, maturing, aging, but there is certain identity, certain individuality, which is distinguishing it from every other body, the other form. And within it, there is a personality, psychological personality and its temperament. So his personality reflects in a wave of persistent individuality. So this persistent individuality is a wave, but we don't necessarily experience it as a wave. We experience it as I am a separate individualized unit. His personality reflects in a wave of persistent individuality. The one universal person, the transcendent, the eternal. So what are we reflecting in this persistent individuality, it is a differentiated, reflected little light of that one universal person, the transcendent, the eternal. So there is this conductor of the vast cosmic symphony. And that one person, whose rhythms and movements and directions find its tiny little reflection in the individual. So that individuality having persistent mold, persistent form, in which there is a tiny reflection. So his personality reflects in a wave of persistent individuality the one universal person, the transcendent, the eternal. We are a tiny little reflection of the original person who is behind all this. Often referred symbolically also as there is this one sun that is reflecting, and reflections scattered in the waters. And that one tiny reflection is what we are individually. In the ignorance, it is always a broken and distorted reflection. In the ignorance, we are living in the ignorance. Mind is an instrument of ignorance. We are groping in the dark, searching for the right knowledge, right rhythm, right melody. In the ignorance, it is always a broken and distorted reflection, because the crest of the wave, which is our conscious waking self, the crest of the wave, only the crest, wave is part of the larger movement, and that larger movement is part of the vaster ocean. That little crest of wave, which is our conscious waking state. We have our sleep state of consciousness, we have our wakeful state of consciousness. In this wakeful state, what we are experiencing is just the crest of the wave. Throws back only an imperfect and falsified similitude of the divine spirit. That divine conductor, the spirit, who is transmitting, but what we are receiving and expressing is only a falsified similitude. There is a lot of transmission loss and a falsification. Though there is similarity, but it is still a distorted, falsified expression because of the limitation of the instrument that we are. Let us read this line once again. In the ignorance, it is always a broken and distorted reflection, because the crest of the wave, which is our conscious waking self, throws back only an imperfect and falsified similitude of the divine spirit. As an individual, we are not truly able to transmit and express without distortion, without falsification, the original signals coming from the spirit, the cosmic conductor of this vast symphony of existence. All our opinions, standards, formations, principles are only attempts to represent in this broken, reflecting and distorting mirror something of the universal and progressive total action and its many-sided movement towards some ultimate self-revelation of the divine. So we have our opinions about everything happening in the world, everything that is happening in our immediate society, everything that is happening within one's own personal life. We have opinions about it. We also have standards. This is the way to do things. This is how to do the right way, standards of conduct. We also have formations, various social conditionings, social formations of which we are part. We are operating within that framework. We have principles. Principles, philosophically derived principles, scientifically derived principles, all that we follow. So these are our reference points as individuals. So all our opinions, standards, formations, principles are only attempts to represent. These are attempts to represent. Individually, we are trying to understand what is going on around us and make our opinions. We are representing our limited understanding. It's the same for the standards that we conduct, create, the formations of which we are part, principles that we follow. Even scientific investigation of nature. Scientists study the entire physical, material movements and come up with laws, principles, and say this is the truth. And we individually believe in it and we follow that. But these are all only representation of something, a partial, limited representation, which is broken, reflecting, and distorting mirror. We individuals and our individual coming together as a collectivity, all these are still a broken, reflecting, and distorting mirror. Broken, reflecting, and distorting mirror. A mirror can reflect. It can reflect with distortion or without distortion. Convex mirror, concave mirror, we know that when there is a slight curvature in the mirror, the whole reflection on the mirror has a distortion. So there are all kinds of distortions that are taking place of the original form, original light that is coming to us. It is broken, reflecting, and distorting mirror. It's a broken mirror, it's a reflecting mirror, it's a distorting mirror. Something of the universal and progressive total action. There is a total action which is progressive. It is progressing. We see over years or millennia, there is a progressive unfolding of individual and collective evolution. Over millions of years, we see species emerging, species disappearing. There is a profound transformation happening, and it is a progressive action. It is never a static, repetitive action, but something that is progressive. Now, this progressive action, it's many-sided movement. It's having many sides to the movement. We are able to grasp only a tiny little wave of it, tiny little side of it, not the totality of it. And this movement is, where does it move? It's moving towards some ultimate self-revelation of the divine. That is the purpose of this grand symphony. This spirit, who is the conductor of the symphony, is revealing himself through this vast instrumentation of nature, of which we are one tiny little instrument playing one of the little melodies. All the rest of the instruments, when they are coming together, there is a whole totality of action. And it is through that cosmic spirit is expressing, revealing in the material nature. All our opinions, standards, formations, principles are only attempts to represent in this broken, reflecting, and distorting mirror something of the universal and progressive total action and its many-sided movement towards some ultimate self-revelation of the divine. The whole purpose of evolution on earth is this progressive self-revelation of the divine. That is the yogic perspective. Our mind represents it as best it can, represents it as best it can. So our human mind is a tiny little instrument, like a little antenna that is picking up and trying to represent what it has received in as best possible way it can. With a narrow approximation that becomes less and less inadequate in proportion as its thought grows in wideness and light and power. But it is always an approximation and not even a true partial figure. So our mind, human mind, is also growing. It is an instrument that is evolving, and that is what we experience as learning. We are learning new things, learning about the world, what life is, and as we wake up, this quest deepens and deepens, and we expand, we enlarge our scope of understanding, whether it is scientific understanding, philosophical understanding. We are growing, expanding. But however expanded it is from the mental perspective, it is still something of an approximation, very limited approximation. It is an instrument like an antenna that is tuning into vaster movement and receiving and representing what it has received. It cannot know what exactly it is, but it can represent what it has received in one form or other. If we look at our communication technologies, they are all kind of a similar form, similar way, representing. There is an experience, that experience has to be represented. The language that we use is a representation. Each word is a representation of a human experience. Then we use collection of words, a language, in order to communicate what the experience is. But the language is only a representation. So is our visual paintings and artworks and all that. Then the ways technology is using them and transmitting, each technology is also representing knowledge. Internet uses photons and packages of photons transmitting across the cables, representing. For example, you send an email, it is converted into a digital package, and photons and light are transmitted across the cables. It's only a representation. On the other end, it is decoded. In a similar way, our human mind is receiving from the vast cosmic spirit, but it's in the process of reception. What it has is only a representation, not the original experience of the conductor of the symphony, the spirit, the cosmic being. How the being knows itself and expresses, only that being knows. Whereas our individualized small mind knows only a tiny representation, which is only a partial figure. So let's read this line. Our mind represents it as best it can, with a narrow approximation that becomes less and less inadequate in proportion as its thought grows in wideness and light and power. Our power of thought is growing, and we realize that what we are representing is inadequate. And that's the paradox of growth. When we are living in deep ignorance, we are certain, this is it, this is how things are. There is a certainty. But as our mind and our knowledge is expanding and growing, we become increasingly uncertain about things, because we begin to see how complex the existential movements are, the nature is, and all our knowledge is only still scraping the surface. Mind represents it as best it can with a narrow approximation that becomes less and less inadequate. That approximation is less and less inadequate in proportion as its thought grows in wideness and light and power. Wideness, light, and power. Mind can be narrow. Mind may not be illumined. Mind may not have even power. These are three different aspects. Mind has a power. The will to know. Mind can have reception of light, illumined mind. Mind can have wideness instead of being shut up in tiny, narrow space. In spite of all that expansion and power it can get, it will still be a representation that is inadequate. But it is always an approximation and not even a true partial figure. This approximation is not even a true partial figure. The divine will acts through the aeons. We have our individual will. This individual will is only a tiny, tiny little reflection of the divine will. And this divine will is acting across aeons, huge spans of time. It knows the entire span, whereas we, the humans, we have our very short lifespan. Within that lifespan, what we can remember is very limited, whereas the cosmic spirit is seeing the totality of time and the cycles that are unfolding over aeons. So the divine will acts through the aeons. We have our individual will. This individual will is only a tiny, tiny little reflection of the divine will. And this divine will is acting across aeons, huge spans of time. It knows the entire span, whereas we, the humans, we have our very short lifespan. Within that lifespan, what we can remember is very limited, whereas the cosmic spirit is seeing the totality of time and the cycles that are unfolding over aeons. So the divine will acts through the aeons to reveal progressively not only in the unity of the cosmos, not only in the collectivity of living and thinking creatures, but in the soul of each individual, something of its divine mystery and the hidden truth of the infinite. Beautiful imagery here. This cosmic being, it is working across aeons. And why and what it is doing? It is revealing progressively not only in the unity of the cosmos. That's one thing. Cosmos is one thing. Not only in the unity of the cosmos, the whole cosmos is progressively evolving. There's a one thing. It is expressing itself in the unity of the cosmos. Now, second layer. Not only in the collectivity of living and thinking creatures. So in the cosmos, we have this little earth and the entire ecosystem, where there are these millions and billions of creatures, and some are living creatures, some are thinking creatures. We are thinking creatures. In this entire ecosystem as a whole, the same cosmic spirit expressing in the cosmos as a whole, it is expressing in the entire collectivity. That's the second level. Cosmos, then comes the collectivity, then comes the third level. In the soul of each individual, something of its divine mystery and the hidden truth of the infinite. So this infinite being is expressing at three different levels. One is at the individual level. It is expressing something of the uniqueness. And we can see that. Our fingerprint is absolutely unique. No other individual has the same fingerprint. So on one hand, there is this vast cosmic unity and progressive revelation of the one in the cosmos. In the second level, we have the entire collectivity of life forms, living and thinking creatures. Through in them also, the divine is expressing. Say, let's take our solar system. There is a unique expression of the sun. There is a unique expression of the Mars, Pluto, Neptune, or other Saturn. Everything has a unique expression. Earth, absolutely unique. Within that whole large unique action, there is this whole ecosystem of Earth itself. Within that, there is all kinds of species. Whole mountain ranges having its own uniqueness. Each river having its own uniqueness. Each species having its own uniqueness. Each thinking creature has, or each particular species having uniqueness. Within a given species, let's take human beings, there is an individual with their own uniqueness, your own unique fingerprint. So this vast cosmic action has unity and diversity right at the heart of it, into the minutest detail. And that's the kind of expression of the divine happening. There is on one hand differentiation into the minutest detail of originality. On the other side, there is a cosmic oneness and unity and diversity. And we are differentiating channels through which there is something of that original mystery, find its unique expression. That makes our individual existence profoundly beautiful, mysterious. That's also the reason why no two realized masters are the same. Everyone gives an absolutely unique revelation of the divine. It is not the repetition of exactly the same experience, but there is always something unique of the mystery. So the divine will acts through the aeons to reveal progressively, not only in the unity of the cosmos, not only in the collectivity of living and thinking creatures, but in the soul of each individual, something of its divine mystery and the hidden truth of the infinite. There is a hidden truth of the infinite that finds its mysterious expression in this tiny little finite individuality. That's the most amazing thing. Infinity finding its expression in this finite, tiny little creature. And the human being has the privilege of becoming conscious of it. Even if our wakeful state at present is only a tiny little distorted representation of the vast cosmic existence. Yet, we do have the blessing and the privilege of knowing this and consciously attuning to the cosmic being. Therefore, there is in the cosmos, in the collectivity, in the individual, three levels. In the cosmos, in the collectivity, in the individual. Here you see the rhythm of Sri Aurobindo's thought reflecting. A rooted instinct or belief in its own perfectibility, a constant drive towards an ever-increasing and more adequate and more harmonious self-development, nearer to the secret truth of things. So simultaneously, across all the levels, in the cosmos, in the collectivity, in the individual, there is something that is a rooted instinct a rooted instinct or belief in its own perfectibility. In human beings, we have this instinctive urge and drive towards perfection, towards freedom. The human quest, somewhere we know our individual life can be better, it can be perfected. Our social life can be better, it can be perfected. Every little artifact that we make can be better, can be perfected. And there is a progressive movement towards greater and greater perfection that we individually experience. The same movement is unfolding in the entire ecosystem. There is a rooted instinct in the entire ecosystem, and that is what propels the evolution to bring out better and better species that can reveal greater and greater transparency of the divine symphony. So it has this rooted instinct or belief in its own perfectibility, a constant drive towards an ever increasing and more adequate and more harmonious self-development. So we are driven from within towards self-development, a self-development that is more and more harmonious, because not all self-development is experienced as harmonious. Our individual growth can be sometimes disruptive to our own personal life or the social life of which you are a part. Now, can an individual evolve and self-develop more harmoniously? Do we need to go through pain and suffering in order to self-develop, in order to evolve? So we do not want to suffer. So that instinct is there. We want to progress, but how to progress harmoniously? Do we need disruption and dissolution in order to progress? That is our current condition. In any society, if the society is to progress, it has to break the old molds and move towards something new. And there comes the revolutions. And there is a destruction, there is a pain, there is suffering. Is it required? Can we progress harmoniously? There can be self-development which is harmonious. So there is a constant drive towards an ever-increasing and more adequate and more harmonious self-development. This is an innate drive in us to seek that harmonious progression, nearer to the secret truth of things. The secret truth of things, the divine movement, has movement from harmony to greater harmony, complexity to greater complexity. But that progression is harmonious in the divine consciousness. But in the human consciousness, there is continuous disruption, pain, suffering. We progress through a great deal of pain and suffering, which is not required, because very secret depth of things is actually, there is a profound harmony in the progressive movement of the divine. But we need to attune to that divine consciousness to experience the movement from harmony to greater harmony, perfection to greater perfection, without unnecessary breakdown, destruction, pain, and suffering. This effort is represented to the constructing mind of man. This effort to bring more and more adequate, more and more harmonious self-development that is unfolding in the individual, collective, and the larger scale. This effort is represented to the constructing mind of man. Constructing mind. Our human mind is constructing its picture of reality. It understands little by little, piece by piece, and it puts them together. A constructed knowledge. So there is the constructing mind of man. It represents that standards of knowledge, feeling, character, aesthesis, and action, rules, ideals, norms, and laws that he essays to turn into universal dharmas. So our tiny little mind it is constructing the picture. And it constructs eventually the dharmas of the individual, dharma of the collective, and converts them into rules, ideals, norms, laws. All are done with good intention of a harmonious individual and collective life. Intention is good, and it is applied at various levels. Standards of knowledge, feeling, character, aesthesis, and action. Standards of knowledge. For example, if you want to publish something in a scientific journal, it has to follow certain standards of writing a scientific paper. So there is a standards of knowledge. Someone might say this is scientific, and someone would say this is unscientific. And there is the standard of knowledge. What can be considered as a true knowledge? What is the right way of knowing? So systems, processes of knowledge, all that. So standards of knowledge, feeling. What is the right kind of feeling? When we have music, arts, poetry, all that, it is dealing with human emotions, feeling. What is the right kind of feeling? Standards of feeling, standards of writing, of poetry, standards of music. So we create sciences and frameworks for all this. Come up with the meters, rhythms, rules of raga, thala, rhythms, melodies. We come up with sciences so that we can get into the right movement. So standards of knowledge, feeling, character, aesthesis, character, behavior, social behavior, and in which the individual has a unique nature. And what is an ideal character? And through our movies and stories, we are trying to represent here is an ideal character. Mahabharata, Ramayana, these are all representing in an iconic archetypal form what is the right code of conduct for a king, how to establish dharma, how to establish appropriate rules for the welfare of the whole. So the great seer poets, lawmakers, and scientists, everyone had been finding the right kind of frameworks, rules, ideals, norms, and laws that he essays to turn into universal dharmas. So we want to make everything into universal principles. We discover gravity, then we want to understand what is the universal principle of gravitation that can be applied everywhere, because there is an instinct in us that the laws can be universal, applied everywhere, not just contextual. So we think about universal values, truth, beauty, justice, freedom. These things become universal values, not limited to a specific social context. So these are human efforts to get into the heart of that mystery and bring that expressed in our collectivity and individual life. So this effort is represented to the constructing mind of man by standards of knowledge, feeling, character, aesthesis, and action. Rules, ideals, norms, and laws that he essays to turn into universal dharmas. So we are at a stage in our collective evolution. All the nation states are coming together and becoming a global civilization. So in that global civilization, each culture is bringing its own standard of conduct. So we see that many civilizations who believe in democracy and collective voting to be a higher value than, they will say, look, there are other civilizations and cultures where there is no democracy, there is a kingship, there is dictatorship, and all these are not the right code of conduct. So there is a clash of values. So in the form of globalization in the last 3-4 decades, there was this attempt to create a standardized global civilization And now we see a revolt from various cultures. No, we want our own individuality. We cannot wipe out our individuality to become one global soup where there is no differentiation. So on one hand, there is an individual differentiation, then there is a cultural differentiation. And this differentiation and diversity, remember, the divine being is differentiating all the way to the individual. So when human beings create standards of conduct and try to implement it across the planet as a universal one rule, one law for everybody, it wipes out the diversity. And that's the challenge that constructing human mind brings, because eventually mind itself is a machine and it will try to standardize, create codes of conduct, and create uniform civilization, uniform code of conduct, uniform civil code within a country and across the planet. And that's the instinctive tendency in the human mind. And Aurobindo has extensively written about this in his Ideal of Human Unity, where the tendency for the mechanized state to create a global civilization which is mechanized, because mind itself is a machine with rules of conduct, which is standardized, uniform civilization. That is not what human unity is heading for, because nature and the divine is impelling towards diversity, a more and more complex unity. It is not uniformity. So when we conduct rules, laws, codes of conduct, we need to keep that in mind. These standards of conduct, systems and processes do have a tendency to wipe out the diversity. That is its limited nature. So this effort is represented to the constructing mind of man by standards of knowledge, feeling, character, aesthesis, and action. Rules, ideals, norms, and laws that he essays to turn into universal dharmas. So there is standards of conduct for the scientist and the rules and regulations for the scientific body of knowledge, but that cannot be applied for a poet, for an artist, for a dancer. They have very different modes of knowing. It is not the analytical, scientific. Arts, music, poetry, they follow different roles. So they all have very, very different ways of doing and knowing things, and having different rules, ideals, norms, and laws, different dharmas. If we are to be free in the spirit, spirit has infinite freedom, but our human life is narrow, bound. We are individually part of a collectivity, and that collectivity has its standards of conduct, moral codes of conduct, systems and processes of which we are a part, and it limits the freedom of the individual. So, if we are to be free in the spirit, that's one of the promises of spiritual growth, to become free in the spirit. If we are to be subject only to the supreme truth, capital T, truth. So, individually, if we are to evolve and become free in the spirit and subject ourselves only to the supreme truth, we must discard the idea that our mental or moral laws are binding on the infinite. Individually, we will be finding ourselves within a family context, within a social context, within the context of a nation state. So family has its own customs, rules, regulations. Society surrounding has its own customs, rules, and regulations. And the nation brings up with its own laws and regulations. And if we bind ourselves to these laws and customs, it won't work. That is a challenge. There is a conflict here. We must discard the idea that our mental or moral laws are binding on the infinite. The spirit must follow the social norms and codes of conduct that we have set up. This is kind of a false expectation by the human mind. Well and good, spirit must express itself within the framework of the nation states and its rules, within the social norms, within the family's framework. Or everyone has its own standards of conduct, different levels. We expect and demand the infinite to fit into our social and moral, mental laws. Now, that's one of the very first mistake or expectation or delusion we have. The next is, or that there can be anything sacrosanct, absolute, or eternal, even in the highest of our existing standards of conduct. We have our existing standards of conduct, many types of standards of conduct, some of them inherited over centuries of tradition, some of them modern, developed. And we do consider out of many of these, some are sacrosanct, absolute, to be untouched, eternally true. That's the second error we make. Our existing standards of conduct, whether it is inherited, modern, newly constructed, considering them to be sacrosanct, absolute, or eternal. So these are the two illusions that we have, delusions that we have, mistakes that we do. One is to expect the infinite to fit into our mental and social laws. When we want to be free in the spirit, other hand, we want to be free, and yet we expect it to fit into our molds. On the other one is the mistake of considering some of our social codes of conduct to be sacrosanct, absolute, and eternal. So between these two, we run into quite substantial challenge. To form higher and higher temporary standards, as long as they are needed, is to serve the divine in his world march. World march. There is a world march of the divine consciousness presiding over everything, the cosmos, the whole ecosystem of Earth, and whole collective life, and within the individual. Everywhere there is a simultaneous world march. In that world march, there is the temporary standards. We are creating standards of conduct. When we are able to look at our standards of conduct as temporary standards, nothing is sacrosanct, absolute, eternal. Everything is changing. When we do that, we are beginning to serve the divine in his world march. The world is rapidly shifting. We see the technological evolution rapidly exploding and changing everything. And all the nation states are struggling to keep up with technological progress because all the social norms, laws, regulations, they are inadequate to handle the newly emerging world. So we are also constantly updating the social laws. In the field of technology, we see already the notion of continuous evolution is very well established. Version 1, version 2, version 3, version 4. That's how everything is now numbered. Internet protocol, version 1, version 2, version 3, version 4, version 5, version 6. So versioning has become a norm in the rapidly evolving technology field. Now we need to bring that into all our social norms and regulations, whether it is financial norms or moral codes of conduct, organizational design and its laws and regulation systems and processes. They are all becoming highly inadequate to deal with the world march of the divine in the world. Things are rapidly shifting, so it is time to look at everything as a temporary standard, temporary construct. So to form higher and higher temporary standards, higher and higher. So every time we are improvising, refining, make it more in alignment with what is emerging, the truth, the forces of life as it is emerging. We have to deal with the complexity. So higher and higher level of harmonized complexity towards which we are moving. So to form higher and higher temporary standards, as long as they are needed, is to serve the divine in his march. So all these standards are created, and we know that they have a time period. There is an expiry date for all the rules and regulations, all the standards of conduct we come up with. If this mindset is there, developed, then we are beginning to serve the divine in his world march. To erect rigidly an absolute standard is to attempt the erection of a barrier against the eternal waters in their flow. A beautiful image. Eternal waters in their flow. The divine consciousness, like a vast river, is flowing through humanity. The eternal waters. In that flow, when we are erecting barriers, that's what we do when we make some of our social constructs to be absolute, unchangeable, rigid. That will be a fundamental error in such a rapidly changing time that we are passing through. So let's read these two lines once again. If we are to be free in the spirit, if we are to be subject only to the supreme truth, we must discard the idea that our mental or moral laws are binding on the infinite, or that there can be anything sacrosanct, absolute, or eternal, even in the highest of our existing standards of conduct. To form higher and higher temporary standards, as long as they are needed, is to serve the divine in his world march. To erect rigidly an absolute standard is to attempt the erection of a barrier against the eternal waters in their flow. So let's hold that image. There is this divine consciousness flowing through humanity. And whichever regional groupings, organizational grouping, nation-state grouping we are, whatever standards of conduct we create, rules and regulations we create, they are all temporary constructs. We cannot expect the infinity to fit into this finite mold if we are aspiring to serve that deepest, highest truth. And we cannot consider any of our moral constructs to be an absolute rule that cannot be changed. Once the nature-bound soul realizes this truth, it is delivered from the duality of good and evil. We have this duality, good and evil. This is a reference point. And we come up with moral, ethical, social laws and rules and regulations to manage, to promote good, support good, and minimize and eliminate evil. And it is for that purpose we come up with our codes of conduct. This is the right thing to do, this is the wrong thing to do. And we are bound by that duality. So once the nature-bound soul realizes this truth is there is this eternal divine consciousness flowing through, and we are entering into the divine freedom and serving only that truth. And none of the codes of conduct can be binding on it, and nothing is sacrosanct. This once realized, That's when it is delivered from the duality of good and evil. For good is all that helps the individual and the world towards their divine fullness. So anything that is helping us to progress towards the divine fullness, individually and collectively, that is good. And evil is all that retards or breaks up that increasing perfection. So any type of activity that retards or breaks up that increasing perfection, that can be considered as evil. But since the perfection is progressive, perfection is progressive, evolutive in time. Good and evil are also shifting quantities and change from time to time their meaning and value. So on one hand, we have perfection that is progressive. Little by little, we are inching progressively towards greater and greater perfection. That is the evolutionary process. So in that context, good and evil are shifting quantities. He's not saying shifting qualities, shifting quantity. If you look at medicine, in the right quantity, a medicine can heal you. But in excess quantity, it can harm you. Even snake's poison in right quantity heals you, saves you. In wrong quantity, it kills you. Water is nurturing life. But when there is too much water, when you're drowning in water, too much quantity, it destroys life. So it is all about the right quantity, the right proportion of everything. Nothing is absolutely good and absolutely evil. No, it is a matter of right quantity, right proportion, right context. So therefore, since the perfection is progressive, evolutive in time, good and evil are also shifting quantities and change from time to time their meaning and value. This thing which is evil now and in its present shape must be abundant, was once helpful and necessary to the general and individual progress. So what was progressive at one point in time? Some decades down the line, some centuries down the line, that became the very obstacle. Now, 2 centuries ago, nation states started emerging, conscious nation states. And today's world, we have the nation states competing and fighting against each other, but at the same time, we have become a global civilization, and the problems are global. Ecological problems are global. And everything is spreading across the planet rapidly. In that context, when a nation state start behaving purely at a selfish reason, selfish way, its own benefit at the cost of everything else, then this whole idea of that nationalism and nation state that is born out of it will become an obstacle to global unity, harmony, and ecological health and well-being. So time has come for us to now go beyond the nation states to universal citizenship and universal civilization. So what was good at one point become a big challenge. The boundaries of the nation states, each nation holding their own militaries and fighting against each other. These things become a great damage to progress of humanity at this point of time. What was good, now it is a challenging problem. Similarly, industrial revolution, financial capitalism, all that pushed humanity rapidly across this industrial revolution and technological explosion now reached a point where we see that wealth is getting accumulated into small pockets and vast majority of humanity are not benefiting, then that form of an economic system is no more suitable for the world march of the divine or the collective human progress. So what worked at certain period of time become the obstacle later and become the evil that we need to fight and transform. So this thing which is evil now and in its present shape must be abundant was once helpful and necessary to the general and individual progress. That other thing which we now regard as evil may well become in another form and arrangement an element in some future perfection. So there is a future perfection that we are aspiring for. In that, whatsoever we come to see as evil now may find a new form, a new place, a renewed life in the new context. But we have to re-evaluate it and correct its distortions. So that other thing which we now regard as evil may well become in another form and arrangement, in another form and arrangement. So there is a shift here happening, an element in some future perfection. And on the spiritual level, we transcend even this distinction. This good and evil distinction is transcended at a spiritual level. For we discover the purpose and divine utility of all these things that we call good and evil. So everything has a divine kernel behind everything. But it is covered with a great deal of distortions, limitations, and that makes them incomplete. So from a spiritual point of view, this duality eventually ends. But for duality to end, we have to see behind so-called good and evil the original truth of its existence, the divine reason for its coming into existence. On the spiritual level, we transcend even this distinction, for we discover the purpose and divine utility of all these things that we call good and evil. Then have we to reject the falsehood in them and all that is distorted, ignorant, and obscure, in that which is called good, no less than in that which is called evil. Whether it is good or evil, in everything there is distortion, ignorance, and obscurity. Once we remove the obscurity, ignorance, and distortion, everything will find its divine function in the totality. There is a right place in the right proportion for everything. That is the perspective the spiritual consciousness, the divine consciousness will be giving us. But when we live in the mental constructs, moral, ethical, social rules, codes of conduct, there is good and evil that we need to see as temporary. The social codes of conduct are temporary formations. Then we have to reject the falsehood in them and all that is distorted, ignorant, and obscure in that which is called good, no less than in that which is called evil. For we have then to accept only the true and the divine, but to make no other distinction in the eternal process. There is an eternal process which is progressively unfolding itself to reveal the divinity in things. In that journey, it creates forms, it creates constructs. And behind everything, there is that original divine presence and impulsion which set things in motion. But in the manifest world, in our social evolution, there comes the distortion, ignorance, and limitation and obscurity of all things. Once we recognize the obscurity, limitation, and ignorance and remove them, then they all reveal their divine essence, whether it is good or evil. That is the perspective the spiritual consciousness will give us, that transcends the duality of good and evil. So with that, we come to the end of this episode. Thank you for being with me in this journey. Please do share your insights, your inspirations, your observations. That will help others to learn from you. Thank you. See you next week.